What's the worst case of rich kid syndrome that you've ever seen? Story 1. I used to work with someone who proclaimed to be an environmentalist. She was very preachy. Once I had a can of Coke on my desk. She said, "You're going to recycle that, right?" She used her father's personal jet all the time, once, just to fly from NYC to Boston to see a baseball game. Story 2. When I was in college for my grad degree and I was working as a TA, during a specific term I was helping my professor with some admin duties for one of his postgrad courses he taught for a different field than mine, and we had this one student who was arguing that she wanted a higher final grade than the one she had gotten. We listened to her explanation to see if there was any merit to her request, and there was something that needed to be changed, but it basically boiled down to I think my grade is too low and I deserve a higher grade because I say so, and we simply told her that after reviewing her performance we could confirm that her final grade was correct and there was nothing to be done about it. She completely lost her and transformed into a super Karen, and after arguing for a bit, she stormed off and started emailing me and the professor and copying everybody in the email chain: her program director, the department head, the head of our registry office, Will Hunting, the security guard, the librarian, etc. And every email she sent was progressively ruder and more entitled than its predecessor because everybody kept telling her that she was unfortunately in the wrong and there was nothing to be done about it. Eventually, she sent a really smug email where she said something to the effect that since everybody was and incompetent at our jobs, we had forced her to copy her father, who was really close friends with the dean, to the email, so we had to do as she said or daddy would get us all fired. Keep in mind, this was a grad student in her mid-20s. The highest ranking person in the email chain replied reiterating that we were all very sorry but she was in the wrong, her grade was correct, and it would not be changed. Then her father replied to the email chain and just said, "There you go dear, I hope you learn from this." She didn't reply anything after her daddy's email, and the matter was closed. To this day I like to imagine that dear old dad tore her a new one for dragging him into her bullshit and making him look bad in front of a bunch of professors from a well-known university where his BFF was the dean because she, his grown daughter, chose to behave like a spoiled brat. Story 3. I was complaining about having to clear off my car from the foot of snow we'd gotten. Guy at work told me there's no way I had to clean off my car. I definitely did, and it took a long time. Well then, it's your own fault for not parking in the garage. I don't have a garage. Everyone has a garage. I'm like, look out the window next time you're driving. Story 4. A girl I went to school with crashed and totaled 6 cars in 3 years, and her parents continued buying her better newer cars cause every accident wasn't her fault, and if she had stuff like a backup camera and sensors they wouldn't have happened. She got into a fender bender in the school parking lot, and her dad showed up with a wad of cash and paid the other student off. Story 5. Girl in my freshman dorm was gifted a Range Rover for her 19th birthday. We were in the parking lot when she came outside. There was a cameraman and maybe 30 people there to surprise her. I was in my truck smoking a joint with buddies and got to watch the dismay on her father's face when she started screaming and crying, literally throwing a tantrum, because she wanted a two-tone Range Rover and didn't want to be basic with an all-white. He got in the car and flew out of the parking lot. I thought this was him punishing her for being ungrateful, but we saw her in a two-tone the next week. Funniest thing is one of my dorm mates at the time slept with her and she gave him herpes. All that money can't save you from herpes. Story 6. Had a guy work for me in the military. He thought he didn't have to do anything because his parents would just call their friends. He ended up getting kicked out for LSD and cocaine use. Story 7. Not me, but a friend of mine was an assistant trainer at a Panera store. They hired a teenager who was only working there to meet people, and one day had a group leave a huge mess in the dining room. Apparently the teen turned to my friend and said should we get the help to clean that, and my friend had to explain that they were the help. He apparently quit not long after. Story 8. Some girl in my college classes was genuinely shocked there were students who had to take out loans because their parents couldn't afford to pay $65K a year for tuition. I have a lot of extended family out in California who I've never met, but I sometimes hear stories from my parents who keep in touch with a few relatives out there. One of my distant cousins, who was like 17 at the time, intentionally totaled the new BMW his parents bought him because he wanted a Mercedes instead. Can't remember if they ended up buying him that Mercedes or not, but they probably did, sadly. Story 9. This one isn't too bad as he's had a few short stints of actually having to provide for himself. Well, sort of, but one of my actual friends is from a fairly affluent family. I was talking to him about the importance of credit. He claimed that credit is a scam and you don't actually need it. I argued that credit is incredibly important, especially these days, as you can hardly even rent a place without good credit anymore. Also mortgages, etc. He argued back that it's far more efficient to buy a house with cash and then fix it up yourself, also with cash of course. I said, but that takes capital, and what about 18 to 22-year-olds who are just starting out in life? Not that most grown adults are in a position to do this either, and of course, he's always bought his vehicles with cash. Dude has flipped multiple houses using his family money and inherited money. Living in the wing of his parents' $1 million house as we speak after a divorce. Has lived there for 7 years now and has not a dime saved up because he feels zero fear for his future. Give me free rent, free utilities, free internet, free car insurance, free phone bill. Yes, his parents pay all of the aforementioned plus things like food, toilet paper, laundry detergent, etc. for 7 years, but I don't come out with at least $200K if I'm only making $35K per year. It's not an opportunity to him, it's just day-to-day reality. Anyone else who's lived like him is currently flying a sign on the side of the interstate. It doesn't compute that he should really be homeless had he been anyone else either. I've pointed this out and he didn't get it. I could make more money if I chose to. Yeah, but where would you be living right now with your shitty credit, etc.? If you had no direct parental support after destroying your life. Also, most people can't just choose to work for nothing because they love what they do. Crazy to see in person. I used to work at a company whose graduate program was a hotbed of nepotism and classism. So we'd either get incredibly talented and hard-working candidates or unsackable graduates of prestigious college whose dad is the prestigious college roommate of the department head's husband. The second group's quality varied wildly. Some were talented and hard-working. Some were solidly average. Some treated the job like it was an optional activity at their social club. I once overheard someone freaking out and being comforted by her friends because her dad bought her a house in the wrong part of London. It wasn't in Chelsea, it was in the nice part of Battersea. Story 10. This is third hand, by way of a former HR manager for one of the Yellowstone NP concessionaires. I find him believable because I trust my source because it track with human nature as I know it. One of the J-1 visa workers contacts young folks from other countries who work in U.S. national parks, usually for life experience from South America, arrived with an unexpected servant. His end of the ensuing discussion was basically, don't worry, he doesn't need his own bed, he's used to sleeping on the floor at the foot of my bed. He'll be performing the job for me. As a member of the upper classes, I can't be expected to do manual labor. It was quickly explained that we don't do things that way in the U.S. That's considered slavery here. It's been illegal for a century. Rich dude refused to bend, got fired, was sent back to Bozeman. I like to think the servant applied for asylum, escaped, that entitled creep. Story 11. A senior rich kid in my high school was driving his dad's Jaguar when his buddy asked him what would happen if he threw into reverse at 60 miles per hour, so they tried it and essentially blew the transmission and the motor up. A few months later he got a Porsche for Christmas. Story 12. I knew a 17-year-old in Santa Monica whose dad was a county judge. He drove a perfectly restored and beefed-up 70s Camaro. It was his third one, having totaled 2 already. He'd drive 100 miles per hour through downtown streets. While drunk and high, he got tickets every week. All of them got thrown out. Story 13. I used to work for a billionaire. His only son died of cancer at 40. The man was a saint. His 3 adopted children, they've all been in and out of rehab and are total shitbags. The one kid went partying with a coworker, said coworker rot in his car, and he tried to have to towed somewhere with the corpse still inside. He's sleeping. Story 14. An extremely wealthy girlfriend of my friend asked me what my favorite Spanish island that I visited as a child is. I told her I never got to go on a family trip, let alone to a Spanish island. Story 15. Rich dude in my HS chemistry class flat out asked how big of a check his dad could write to get him out of taking a major test. He was serious. Nothing happened to him. Story 16. When I was in uni, I was working as a waiter. Coming from a poor family, was barely scraping by. Being in the middle of 2008 crash did not help the situation either. There was this kid that was supposed to be a host, but it was just the owner doing favor to his mate, as his mate's son was a useless piece of and daddy wanted to get him to get some real-world experience. Everyone hated him. Imagine Jeffrey Bradahean type punchable face. His idea of striking conversation was sitting at our table after shift and complaining how his dad is trying to buy him a new Mercedes and he does not want it. Once I was walking up the stairs with a heavy tray 15 plates and complaining about the day. He just casually said maybe if you paid more attention in school, you wouldn't have to do this job. Never before was I weighing the worth of time spent in jail versus breaking someone's neck. At some point he tried to make his own business within the place by asking waiters to give him some seating fee for him putting tourists at their tables. Tourists in my country, Eastern Europe, tipped a lot more than locals. He tried to do this with a senior waiter, 40-year-old dude, and with a straight face told him that he does not need the money, but he wants to show him how the real world works. The guy head taller than that told him if he ever tries that again he will take him outside and show him a piece of his real world. He did not come back. All of this happened within 2 weeks. There was a kid that was incredibly popular at my school because his dad owns half of the restaurants on the Monterey Wharf. They have a pool in the shape of the first letter in their last name, make huge money, etc. But he's not his dad's son. His wife got drunk and around with one of his waiters in the 90s. Anyhow, dude had a pair of shoes that Kanye West wired during a concert. His dad spent $7,000 on them for him. This dude was just a super scrawny wannabe, pale white dude that wanted to be black so bad. In the locker room during PE he would say alright let's freestyle. He would be surrounded by half-naked guys dropping a beat. Then all you would hear is, yeah that's right, gonna drop some bars, it's gonna go hard, yeah I ain't got nothing. Everyone would still cheer and be like, aight, next time we know it's gonna be fire. Then as everyone was walking away, God he's so stupid he can't do, but everyone would go back to loving him because his dad would let him throw parties at his house, and magically there would be all sorts of alcohol that no one else could get their hands on. Story 17. Ethan Couch killed 4 people, and got 10 years probation, but then he messes that up and it turned into him being in Mexico with his mom, violating probation. He only served a total of 720 days in jail. He is free today. Absolutely disgusting. Story 18. I was in a mental hospital with a girl who was about to get released, but it up because when her mom came for visitation she told her she wouldn't buy the girl's boyfriend best friends each an iPod Touch. The girl yelled that her dad would and threatened to pour acid in her mom's face for being a broke. The girl was 12 or 13, her dad was rich, but the whole reason she was in the hospital was for attacking her dad's stepmom. I don't know fully what happened. Story 19. When I was in elementary school, this kid lived in the only gated community in the area, and the houses were all mansions. He was telling me a story about his tennis court in his courtyard. I said, "Wait, you have a tennis court at your house?" He looked genuinely shocked, and responded with, "You don't." Blew my mind as a little kid who had to share a room with my single mom. Story 20. Once I was explaining to my college roommate how I was working overtime so I could afford airfare back home for the holiday break. Later that day she had a meltdown because her parents told her they were going to Cancun for Christmas, but we went to Cancun last year. Story 21. To put it bluntly, for you and me there are fines and penalties, whereas to them is only costs. Example: park where you shouldn't, 80 rich viewpoint cost 80, to park here. Run a red light, 240, fine, or just to ignore traffic laws, or maybe rape your 3-year-old daughter, and the judge says, well, you are too rich to spend time in jail. Looking at you, DuPont. Let's get real here. There has always been a threshold where justice ends and money makes that threshold. Story 22. I had a friend who worked as a counselor at an American summer camp somewhere in Pennsylvania. He said that these kids would leave so much of their belongings because they couldn't be bothered packing them up, and they would just expect their parents to replace what they had left. He came away with Beats headphones, brand new shoes although a few sizes too small, gaming equipment. He also said that one day they were playing a game of flag football and one of the kids fell and grazed his cheek. This kid was some child model, so his parents had him helicoptered out of the camp so he could get plastic surgery over the injury. Story 23. I had a roommate who would cook huge meals and destroy the kitchen. She would eat her meal and head to her room. A couple hours later she'd come out and be fully pissed off that the kitchen was still a mess. She'd had servants most of her life and was now on her own. Story 24. There was a guy I went to high school with whose parents bought him a brand new Cadillac for his 16th birthday. He crashed it a week later in a drunk driving accident, and so they bought him a replacement. He never got in trouble with the law, or so he claimed very loudly at lunch while bragging about his second new car, so I can only assume money changed hands. Story 25. This is secondhand, but a co-worker of mine used to work as a nanny to an extremely wealthy family in LA. The oldest daughter would drive her car around until it ran out of gas, then call home for a driver to come get her. She'd leave the car wherever it was and the help would have to fill up the car and drive it home for her. This happened regularly. Story 26. Robert H. Richards, heir to the DuPont family fortune, who confessed that he really enjoyed raping his 3-year-old daughter, but avoided prison time because he's the DuPont heir. Story 27. Rich family friends I don't associate, but my aunt and cousins don't accept gifts during Christmas because they can just buy it themselves, completely dismissing the fact that it's about love and appreciation rather than money. Edit: as I've said in some replies, I'm sure some people with this mindset mean well. I just said it was a rich person thing because the family I'm talking about definitely mean it in a spoiled way. Story 28. I'm going with my best friend's older sister. Best friend doesn't care for materialistic or her rich upbringing. Sister different story. One day, we asked her to pick us up a rotisserie chicken. She came back upset. Without chicken, she couldn't understand why it was so cheap. According to her, it should have been 40. She thought something was wrong with it for being 7. Story 29. Newly married neighbor decided to sell his sports car because a baby was coming. A dad bought it for his teenage son. Picked it up at 8 p.m. Kid rolled it by midnight. Story 30. There's a 36-year-old in one of the gaming groups I spend a moderate amount of time in who calls himself retired. You're not retired, you have inherited wealth because your daddy is a business owner in Dubai. I have t-shirts who have worked longer than this guy was ever in the workforce, and I mean that literally. He also seems confused when people can't afford to have their kitchens outfitted with RGB lighting, take a week unpaid off work for a gaming convention, and when someone mentions needing to budget for groceries. He also complained that computer parts are so expensive in NZ while also owning not 1, not 2, but 3 multi-million-dollar condos in Auckland. He's a caricature of a rich person that I would not have believed was real without having met him. Story 31. A guy I know is a decent fella, but he keeps starting all of these different follies that don't go anywhere because he doesn't really have to work for them. I worked with him when he was a young creative intern at an ad agency. He was pretty good at partying but not very good at doing the job, which contrary to popular belief requires a lot of work. He soon dropped out of advertising when he realized it wasn't just ping pong and coke. He then started a yoga studio with himself as head instructor. A year or two after starting yoga, post a few pics of yourself doing a stretch next to a waterfall. Bam, yoga expert. Then he appeared to become a travel influencer, traveled the world and would make posts about wanderlust and how everyone's a sucker for staying in their jobs when there's a whole world out here, man. Then he became like a social media branding consultant type thing and would post all the time about how to start a business despite his last 2 ventures fizzling. Now he occasionally posts motivational quotes and I have no idea what he's up to. Nice guy, but I think he's lost in using money to just buy his way to a satisfying life, but doesn't realize the satisfying part is actually building it. Story 32. I went to a HS filled with children of celebs, C-suites, models, etc. I was maybe the only poor person. There might have been a few others who dropped out because they couldn't stand the culture. These kids ran the school. They got teachers fired. In 1 year, I had 9 chemistry teachers. In other words, I near failed the state exams due to having zero actual instruction. There's no way I can say I beat them in success unless I build a 100M business on my own. That's how incredible it is to be a rich kid. Story 33 in person. Someone I vaguely knew heard that I was looking at buying a house and wanted to show off her expertise because she'd already gone through this process before I was complaining that everything was too expensive and my budget wouldn't allow for much. And she was super confused and told me to tell my parents it was an investment. She thought that my parents would buy it for me made me so angry that she just thought that was normal. I'm from a low-income family, so I actually now send money to my parents to supplement their income. For context, her parents bought her a multi-million-dollar house and put it under her name plus her boyfriend's name, who hasn't been dating for that long. Obviously they broke up. This has got to be the easiest way anybody has made $2 million. Also shows how millions of dollars is truly just pennies to rich people. Story 34. Brock Turner's dad claiming him brutally raping a girl who was unconscious was a 20 minutes of action, and expecting that to help his sentencing be more lenient. Pathetic. Story 35. Trust fund baby in college regularly FedExed his dirty laundry home for his mother maid to do because laundry is women's work. The Fort Worth affluenza kid who killed all those people. Story 36. Knew a kid in college who called Highland Park the ghetto unironically. He lived there. It's one of the richest if not the richest town in the DFW Metroplex. He would get tickets to see Notre Dame play and fly back to college in Texas. Same kid once pulled out a second MacBook in class. Then the other rich kid he was sitting with said, "Oh my god, you have a second MacBook." I can't lie, I do too. Both of them were insufferable. Story 37X came from a rich family. They bought him a car. It was a used car but nice. He didn't like the car, so he got his best friend to steal it, drive the out of it, parts it, and then leave it in a ditch. Made it look like a real stolen car situation. He wanted insurance to pay out to get a different car. Car was found a few days later by the police, but he definitely got his wish, and his parents got him a different car. Story 38. A 10th grader spilled nail polish in her purse and started screaming in the middle of class that it was a 4,000 bag and her dad wasn't going to buy her another new one. First of all, don't be trying to paint your nails in English class. Second, so this is not the first designer bag you ruined by being a careless dolt. Excuse me while I continue along teaching Frederick Douglass because some people have real problems. Story 39. My cousin went to a wealthy high school. This complained to me. A poor child that her dumb parents got her a Cadillac for her first car instead of a Mercedes like all the other kids had. Story 40. My sister-in-law recently had a major screaming match with her parents because they are paying for the entire family to vacation in Las Vegas this year, and she wanted to go on a tropical vacation. Story 41. Once knew a kid who got a nice car for his 16th birthday but he wanted a Camaro. He parked his car on the train tracks, claimed it stolen, thinking his parents were going to buy him that Camaro to replace it. Thankfully, his dad bought him a Schwinn. Story 42. A woman I know, her and her husband had their huge 2-story 10-bedroom house relocated to a town 25 miles away. They had to close down 2 towns' main streets to do it. I asked her how much it costs. She said at least $1,000. Story 43. Brock Allen Turner, now known as Alan Turner, the Stanford swimmer who assaulted an unconscious woman behind a dumpster and got barely a slap on the wrist. He resides in his rich parents' house in Dayton, Ohio. Story 44. Trust fund baby would throw iPhones in the toilet and flush whenever he wanted a newer phone or different color. Plumber was called and the treasure trove was found. Story 45. While I was student teaching, I was breaking kids into groups for a game. One kid from a stupid wealthy family said if you put me with his friend he'll give you a raise. I was going to put him with his friend before he said that because for once he was actually behaving. After he said that, I looked at him in the eyes and put him on another team. Story 46. My former best friend in HS purposely kept dropping her very nice musical instrument on the parking lot at marching band practice, so her parents would finally buy her the $10K one she really wanted. Claimed my parents didn't care about me. BC. I drove an old clunker that was maybe valued at $2K and had no safety features because, well, it was nearly 20 years old. She had a brand new car with all the bells and whistles. Guess who had a cleaner driving record? Story 47. A friend of my brother's inherited a lot of money when his dad passed away. His mom sold his dad's business and gave him $150,000 in a couple rental houses. He was 25 and had never had a girlfriend. But after that, shockingly, his weed dealer's daughter realized she was in love with him. They blew through it all in record time, got married. Tried to gift her family the rental houses, but his mom hadn't transferred the deeds and wouldn't. Stole money from her by taking a blank check and making it out to him for $50,000. She had his mom's phone and info and answered it and gave the okay. She had them arrested, eventually dropped the charges, but washed her hands of them. Wife fell out of love with him. Last I heard she had gone to prison for other things, got out, had a kid and went back. He's working at McDonald's. He'll never forget how bewildered he was that they will shut off your utilities if you don't pay the bill, even if you explain to them that you don't have the money. Story 48. A kid at my school was jokingly in shock that we didn't have crystal glasses, swimming pools or expensive polos. He always bragged about being able to afford the latest Apple products as well. Understandably, he was pretty hated. Story 49. Went to school with a ton of rich kids. Most were nice, but they never really understood why your parents can just buy this or do this. They always had good intentions and were curious. I was happy that they never grew up knowing the answers to the whys. Story 50. When I was in college, My buddy's wealthy GF also went there and I'd see her around campus and say hi sometimes. One day, after my last class, I was walking up the street to catch the bus home and she honked and waved. I went to one of her parties a few weeks later and she came up and said hey but looked super concerned and asked if I was okay. I was like yeah why lol and she said oh because when I saw you after class that day you were just walking on the sidewalk. I said yeah, I was walking to the bus stop heading home. To which she sighs a huge sigh of relief and goes oh my god, I thought you were homeless. After further elaboration, it turned out that she was so wealthy and spoiled by her parents with vehicles and other stuff. She genuinely thought that people who didn't have cars and had to walk or take buses were all homeless unless they were jogging or old, rich people in her neighborhood going for walks. She was honestly a sweet and kind person, but was so far removed from reality, with such a reinforced and granted safety net and lavish lifestyle, that her perception of society was completely skewed. Story 51 I grew up in Lake Oswego, Oregon. We barely made rent on a decent apartment in LO. Almost every single kid I went to school with had a new BMW by age 16. I was on free lunch ticket program because my mom was so poor, it was like the whole school had rich families and I was just a poor POS. They definitely treated anyone not wearing designer brands like literal. I started knocking kids out who made fun of me. One kid said my lawyer dad is gonna sue you. After I hooped as I was like good luck with that. Poor remember. Story 52 dude offered me $900 to punch a stranger because he thought it would be funny. I said no, and he was so confused why I wouldn't because he could hand me the money right away. Story 53 not rich kid but rich grown up. I used to work at a call center that set up appliance repairs. This lattice fridge broke down and she said she wanted a different brand. I was like that's fine we can send you a check and you can buy whichever you like, but then she proceeded to tell me that we need to replace every single appliance in her kitchen now because it all had to match and that she can't have unmatched appliances like some white trash. I immediately hung up on her. Story 54 ooh I have a good one. A doctor friend of mine sent his son to USC. One day the son was talking to a group of other students and they asked him so how much money is in your trust fund? He was confused and said that he didn't have one. They kept asking him, he kept saying his dad was a DR and they were comfortable, but he definitely did not have a trust fund. Their response was everyone has a trust fund. You just don't know about it, yet these people legit think everyone has a trust fund. Story 55 I had an ex that received an almost new $30,000 fully loaded truck 10 years ago, so $50,000 today from her parents. When she went to college her younger sister got to pick her own car when she went to college. My ex went ballistic about it, multiple times. She was inconsolable about the fact her sister got to pick him her car out, rather than just being given one like, how the can you get such an expensive truck for free, with insurance and gas paid for by your parents, and not only complain, but throw a full-on tantrum. Was a good experience for me to see how differently other people grew up. Story 56 I spend time in Mexico each winter. There are a lot of rich kids there Mexican and American where I live. I have Mexican friends who interact with these kids. My friends tell me that it is not uncommon for these kids to contact their parents for money and be wired $10,000 or more. This is for a weekend. Story 57 I had a student whose parents were fairly wealthy, upper elementary, about to hit JR high. She was always on vacation, in out of school, when she was there, running late, never prepared, extremely charming, everyone's favorite kid, but no discipline or life skills at all. It was obvious that she was behind on her development, like keeping track of her things, or being properly dressed for the weather, because of how little her parents taught her. It really seemed like they treated like an expensive pet, and she deserved better than that. A friend I had in college was also from a wealthy family. Everything had been handed to him, and you could tell that it messed with his sense of meaning and purpose in life. Head had a similar upbringing to the student I mentioned before. Brilliant guy, but the fact that his parents had just bought the solution to every problem he had really fed into a sense of nihilism. I remember him running over his laptop one time, and just his reaction was like, huh, okay. It used to worry me how recklessly he partied sometimes, because it seemed like he felt like all of it was meaningless. I'm glad he was able to push through that season, but seriously. I feel like people using money to raise their kids and not giving them any life skills is a form of neglect that doesn't often get talked about. Story 58 not malicious at all, but as a freshman in HS my family was poor and I was too young to have a job. I was invited by some newish friends to go to the mall for some back-to-school shopping. I arrived at one's house and she was talking to the other girl about how much she had to spend. They both were given $200 by their parents. I said I had 17. They said 70. I said no, just 17. One said, oh no, did your parents forget to give you money? My parents can give you some and your parents can just give it to them when they pick you up. I had to embarrassingly explain that no, they didn't forget, and I couldn't borrow money my parents wouldn't be able to pay them back. I was happy to just go along and window shop mostly like I had planned. I was actually happy to have saved up 17 at the time. Could get me a couple of shirts in the clearance section at Forever 21 or some earrings or something. It wasn't her fault, she was trying to be helpful, but it stuck with me as just a deeply isolating incident. My parents always made sure I was fed and clothed, but having $200 to blow on a shopping trip with friends was defo not in the picture. Story 59 a student at my college would park illegally in front of his apartment complex all the time because it was a convenience spot and he would just pay the parking tickets. Story 60 well, apparently we all learned this week that Gen Z was unaware that Osama bin Laden had a raging case of rich kid syndrome. just a different kind than the one we are typically used to, so, yeah, I'm going with Osama. Story 61 knew someone in college in the early 2000s whose parents bought him a $60K SUV which he crashed, so his parents bought him another, which he crashed, so his parents bought him a third $60K SUV. Story 62 There was this documentary of rich kids in New York when Ivanka Trump was a teenager. In one part, she discusses her father's influence in New York building and says something like I can't wait until I can own a piece of the skyline too. Story 63 I had a student never show up to class or turn in any assignments. They failed. They complained to Daddy, who was a well-known rich person in our community. He complained to the president of my university and I had to go to a meeting justifying the student failing. Story 64 My best friend's Aunt Sanso, her cousin is super rich and lives in New Zealand in the States. Anyways, Aunt goes to visit her son. Loves it there so much that the son just buys her $1 million home. She just abandoned her home here with all her belongings in an expensive area and asked her friends to just go and take whatever they want. She left everything. That blows my mind. Story 65 A friend of mine had a classmate who paid others to do her homework once because if she didn't get an A on that she wouldn't get $50K and a brand new car as a bonus from her dad. She would have gotten around $30K on only getting a C, but she didn't want so little money with no car. I didn't know rich kid syndrome was a thing before that.